In Elden Ring, you have the freedom to explore one of the biggest, most breathtaking worlds, slaying dangerous beasts, collecting heaps of sick weapons and armor while powering up to godlike levels, and ultimately, coming face to face with Radagon in the final confrontation. You cut your foe down and sit atop the world's end after possibly hundreds of hours of playtime through all of your struggles, and a rush of pure gaming exhaustion and joy flood your body. And then, the game cuts to black. Reflecting on my first playthrough of Elden Ring exactly 1 year ago, I remember feeling like I was part of something special. I've been playing games my whole life, and to that day, I had never seen such hype and excitement for one game ever. 30 years ago, games were just beeps and bots, played by starry-eyed nerds. Yet on this fateful day, it seemed like the entire world knew about Elden Ring. So, like everyone else, I jumped straight in, and I was met with one of the craziest and most memorable experiences in years. It consumed me for months, and though I would have done some things differently, I considered it a bona fide masterpiece nonetheless. But strangely, not one that I ever wanted to play again. The truth is, I never went back to Elden Ring prior to this video, and I never wanted to. I typically dedicate myself to 1 or 2 games at a time, and the ones I do play, I play a lot. But Elden Ring was not one of those games. That's because I had done everything I wanted to do. I scoured the map, I reached every site of grace, I tried over a dozen builds, I found most of the secrets, and I saw all of the endings. I had essentially the most thorough and complete playthrough of any game I had ever played. I had this feeling of having no life outside of this one single game. Locked in my room essentially for the duration, I was drawn to the game so much, and all the deaths and the victories I had, and the absurd amount of time I spent in the game world itself was absolutely all-consuming. Every now and then, however, memories of Elden Ring would come back to me during the next year away from the game. Never ones that drew me back in, but some that made me curious how I'd enjoy it again after having such a definitive experience already. I've played all the From Software games multiple times, and I always crave going back for even years. But why did I feel like I didn't need to go back to the lands between? Why did I not even want to? These were the questions I was asking myself standing at the precipice of Limgrave this month. After a year without play, I set out again, not sure what I would find. The thing that hit me immediately about Elden Ring is that the play experience is forever changed once you figure out the system. On your very first day with Elden Ring, a veritable cornucopia of possibilities awaits. Being an open world game, the number of options seems pretty endless. You can fight the big guy on the horse. You can run past him to the north. You can go in a teleporter and be whisked off to some strange place. You can go left, right, down, or up the hill to your left, or down the embankment beside you. You can even turn around and go back the way you came. If you view it this way, your frame turns into this, where the green is your possibility range. Simply viewing the screen as a series of paths you can take can tell you a lot about a video game in itself, and that's only from one position that you stand in. Keep moving forward, and the tree continues to branch out in an almost infinite amount of routes. These possibilities open up to even more options when you enter new areas, where an entirely new and enormous game space stands before you. Multiply that by all the zones in the game, with all the peaks and valleys of the topography, all the caves and ledges, all the castles and the mountains you can climb down or fall, and you have one endless series of player choices. Player choices that, by all accounts, can lead to anything. Limitless amounts of possible rewards, spells, weapons, stories, or environmental interactions. You don't know. It could be literally anything around any corner. And even greater still when you realize at any points you can just turn around and go backwards to any other place you've already been or any other place you've seen, gated by no linear quest that demands you go in any particular direction. Take this concept and apply it to Dark Souls 3 and immediately it becomes apparent that you have control. Control over where you want to go. Control over what you fight, control over how you power up, In Elden Ring, you can run past everything you want to. You can grab the items you want, farm runes, and avoid all the enemies that you do not want to fight, essentially giving you the power and the control to ignore the entire open world. That is because the open world permits extraordinary opportunities to avoid nearly all of it, giving you absolute control over your entire play experience and the ability to manipulate that progression through your gameplay. Control on paper is great for that first naive playthrough because players don't really know that they can manipulate the game to the point of breaking. You know you have some freedom, but did you really know how far you could take it? You don't know that of the 200 plus bosses that the game has, you only need to beat 11. You don't know that you don't even have to step foot in Stormvale Castle. You don't know that Renala can be skipped. For all you know, you must kill every damn boss you see. You don't know where all the items are, and if farming is an efficient method of progress. Your eye is fixed on exploring every place you visit because you haven't figured out the system. Anything could have been around any corner, and that excited me. There were no bounds to my imagination and my excitement. I was a slave to the temptations of the lands between, like many. This results in a masterclass of freedom and immersive play, as you view the game as one long, mysterious journey where anything is possible. But what if you knew about the system? What if you knew that the world was the canvas and that you could manipulate that world to suit your needs at any moment? If you acquired that information, it would forever change the way you'd interact with it, wouldn't it? Once you knew where everything was that you needed and how to get to your goals, there was no need for anything beyond efficiency. And as such, the game is forever changed. This was my early revelation that I feared, that the open world would actually make my second playthrough a lot less special than my first. The thing that kept me playing From's more linear games was the progression, specifically how you created builds and how they progressed as the game went on. In most Souls games, it's a gradual process. Play a game like Bloodborne or Dark Souls 3 and you'll know exactly what I mean. You start off as a piece of shit, you struggle, and then after many hours you eventually become strong. Progression was instilled in the adventuring and the completion of its content. You worked for what you wanted, and you might not get all of it before tackling the endgame. Souls weren't farmed in the millions, they were rare, and very important for leveling. If you really wanted to farm, the best option in Dark Souls were the Knights in Anna Orlando, and this was halfway into the game. Important materials were spread out all over the game world, such as the Dull Ember, needed for infusions or upgrade materials. You would find these in the mid-game after several mandatory requirements. Unless you were part of the small community of level 1 challenge runners, you would never ignore the game world like you can with Elden Ring. So you took it seriously, you used what you had, and if you found something you really liked, you upgraded it throughout your playthrough, sometimes all the way up to the very end. The world was your progression. Elden Ring's world allows you instead to run to the item you want, and this goes for pretty much all other things you'd want, like sacred tears, golden seeds, physics, and spells. It's even possible to run to all the smithing stones and upgrade materials to upgrade your weapons from 1 to max. So playing Elden Ring again is more or less an exercise of running from point A to B to C, grabbing everything you want while, and I think this is very important, avoiding all challenges and fighting in the process. Quite possibly running through the entire game. Rest at all the important sites of grace you'll need, make your build, and then go beat the game. Once you understand the liberties the game allows, you have little reason to engage with the open world, and it becomes more or less a means of getting to and fro. Sure, it's gorgeous, but because you have immediate and endless access to essentially everything, the veneer of it ends up fading away a lot faster than I anticipated. Elden's vast world also leads to a ton of empty travel time, and that can get kind of boring despite the cool visuals and music, but only because you don't really need to interact with it. Wrap those two things up together and the entire progression of your character changes from immersing yourself in an incremental, mysterious challenge of a video game into farming, writing, and collecting. And what results is more or less a speed run, wherein you teleport to the places you need to, farm what you need to, and avoid basically everything else. And this transforms the play experience away from an adventure into more of a set of goals that you are setting for yourself. And with that checklist, I knew exactly how to do what I was going to do and when I was going to do each step. I want to keep reinforcing that this is the structure of a second playthrough, not a first. This is why the initial blind playthrough is so great. The game rewards exploration by stuffing itself full of the excitement of discovering those new things. Elden Ring's magic is not knowing what's behind the next corner. Every detail on the map is a ruin, a cave, a building, some sort of possible secret, and it's awesome to explore it. But once you know exactly where everything is you need on your next run, you bother with only what you need and you cut out everything else. What is left is just a huge amount of empty ocean. Revisiting these mini dungeons doesn't feel worthwhile a second time, especially considering New Game Plus does not randomize loot. It's certainly great for those who missed items on their first run, but it carries a big cost for completionists like myself. Not to mention they all look the same and they house many repeat bosses, which is a major issue in itself of the game regardless of playthrough number. What was cool about this process, though, was the feeling that you could run off and make any build you wanted to, and make it really good. Come back to the starts, and then proceed to make the game your bitch. You could approach this like a speedrunner by trying different challenges, or run through the game standard. Elden Ring awards instantaneous access to the ultimate power fantasy and it's fun, but there is no denying that this pretty much obliterates the very reason why a lot of people love to play From Software games. The advantages that the Souls game possess is that they are streamlined experiences. Once you've explored everything in Elden Ring, the open world just becomes a backdrop of endless, often tedious travel, whereas exploring in a Souls game is often very quick and simple. Areas are tightly designed and quick to go through, and it's much harder to farm souls in general. Enemies sometimes drop upgrade materials, and the souls you take for them are used for natural leveling. If you fight all the enemies along your way, you'll have more than enough souls to level sufficiently and upgrade your weapon to whatever you want to. As such, you feel more compelled to fight through the game's various challenges regardless of playthrough. Challenges that were tailor-made in handcrafted environments, whereas in Elden Ring, it's not the most optimal way. Pretty much all the luster of the open world vanishes when you realize you don't really have to engage with it, and it's that open world design itself that is at the heart of the problem. All those encampments of undead, the enemies in the tower housing the item you want, every enemy in the legacy dungeons, just run past them. It's faster to kill the sleeping dragon in Caelid, cheese the Berg in Mogwin Palace, or slaughter all the turtle guys with that conveniently placed Site of Grace. Once you know you have control, there is zero reason to fight anything that would be considered mildly annoying or inefficient, which trivializes most of Elden Ring's open world and even its dungeons, turning repeat playthroughs into collectathons and farming simulators. Interacting with the lands between becomes utterly optional. What's missing is that wonder from my first playthrough or that beautiful sense of progression in all of my runs in Dark Souls 3 or Bloodborne. And honestly, I really missed it. But don't get me wrong, I still had a lot of fun. Blowing shit up as an overpowered cosplay of Melina is a blast, but somewhere along the lines that fun faded, like an afternoon sun sinking in the horizon, and much quicker than I had anticipated. There are some benefits though. Being able to skip past areas you don't want to engage with is a big plus. In Dark Souls 3, areas were small, but you still had to run through them if that's what you wanted to do. Elden Ring lets you skip the things you don't like and indulge in what you do like a fat kid in an ice cream parlor. Instead of spending 10 minutes sprinting to the Abyss Watchers, you can just say no thanks and run the other way. This in some ways combats the irregularities of its open world, adding to replay value. But it is hard for me to imagine myself going back to Elden Ring the same way I've gone back to other games in the From Software catalog. And after replaying it, I do feel torn. Playing Elden Ring a second time didn't add that much to the sweet reverence of my initial playthrough, as the original element of surprise and awe had basically vanished. Perhaps it's humans' natural inclination to take shortcuts for efficiency and immediate gratification. I didn't just run through the lands between, I straight up ignored it, transforming Elden Ring into a speed racer. In a weird way, Elden Ring actually suffers under its own awesomeness. It offers so much that maybe it's just me being ungrateful for the breadth of experiences it offers. On the other hand though, that doesn't mean I have to bend my preferences when the window dressing has been lifted. 1 year later, my playthrough of Elden Ring didn't change my opinion of the game, because the game isn't obligated to entertain you for eternity, and in the same way that you want it to. But it did open up my eyes to the downsides of open worlds and endless freedom. Ultimately, it made me thankful for all of the From Software experiences I've already had. I may have craved the more non-fat linear adventure of Dark Souls 3 while I was playing Elden Ring for the second time, but honestly that game has its flaws as well. Every facet of every game ever made has trade-offs, and Elden Ring's most crippling one for me is the lack of replayability brought on by its open world design, even though my initial playthrough was far more memorable than any of the Dark Souls games. Elden Ring ultimately has better combats with more fluid mechanics and depth, and a crazy amount of variety to build crafting, but it's also, for me, disappointing on successive playthroughs. Trying new builds, role-playing and questing helps, and doing co-op was honestly one of the things that kept me going, but those things are just as good in other Souls games. Regardless, the journey from start to finish is second to none blind. The initial feelings of awe, wonder, frustration, determination, relief, and triumph only come once, and perhaps due to human nature's own impatience and desire to follow the path of least resistance, the same gratifying experience cannot be captured in a second playthrough.
The rune of death is unbound.